Hello, I'm Incog Natalie, and I'm an ex-Jehovah's Witness. So, there are a couple reasons why I'm hiding my identity. The first, as I'll get to more in depth later on, is that Jehovah's Witnesses in general are very transphobic. And while I wouldn't consider myself a trans person, I was born as a male. And at this point, I do consider myself to be a non-binary individual. Now, if anyone ever found out in the organization what my real identity was, I would be shunned by the rest of the family that still is talking to me. It is just a risk that I can't take at this point. The other reason that I'm hiding my identity is that I also live in a state where they aren't currently friendly to trans and non-binary individuals. So for my safety, I'm just going to hide who I am for the time being. So there's a couple reasons for me creating this channel at this point. I believe that it's very important to add my voice and my story to the abundance of voices and stories that have been happening in recent years. I have been out of the organization for quite a while and have maintained as low of a profile as I can. But there are certain things about the organization that just need to be brought to light. I also want to normalize certain experiences that I've had. It's almost certain that there are many individuals currently in the organization that are questioning their gender, but are not in a position to explore those thoughts, feelings, desires. So, just real briefly, Jehovah's Witnesses are a high control organization that were started in the late 1800s. Now, if you're curious as to what a high control organization is, I would recommend looking up the information available about the BITE model by Dr. Stephen Hassan, which I'll leave a link in the comments or the description below. But Jehovah's Witnesses are really known for their no blood doctrine. In recent years, it's been coming to light that they have been covering up child abuse or disincentivizing the governing leadership, the elders, from providing that information to the authorities. They're also known for their many false predictions for the end, including the turn of the century, 1975, 1914. And they're also known for their belief that only 144,000 are going to heaven. So like I mentioned, I was born as a male. So growing up in the organization was very different than the females in the organization. There were a lot of expectations that were placed on the men in the organization. Only the leaders are men. So in order to be in what they call elders or ministerial servants, you had to be born a male. And I was definitely on that track at one point. I was, I can't think of a better word, but essentially being groomed to be a ministerial servant and an elder in my congregation. Fortunately, I was reproved shortly before any appointments happened, and I never recovered in the organization after that. I did go back to meetings, and I did make a good effort to try and reinvigorate myself spiritually, but it didn't stick. And I'm obviously very thankful that it didn't. As far as other things about growing up in the organization, I did miss out on a lot of time with my family. So for me personally, only one of my parents had other family members that were Jehovah's Witnesses. The other parent, all of my other family on that side of the family are like Baptist or Protestant. And so the only time that we really saw them was maybe like before, after holidays. I remember going to my grandparents' house, and they did their best to include me in their festivities and everything. But, in the organization, we're taught to be wary of unbelievers, even if they're family members. And so I really missed out on developing close relationships with more than half my family. And at this point in my life, it's really hard. I have reached out to some of them, but you just can't make up for the lost time that you had. The other thing is that, for the most part, all of my friends growing up were also Jehovah's Witnesses. So I didn't spend a lot of time with the other people that I had met at school. I didn't really get to know a lot of them, at least not until way after high school. Some of them I kind of reconnected with in college, but still, I suppose there is a theme to being a Jehovah's Witness, and it's lost time. Even if you stay a Jehovah's Witness your entire life, you're still missing out on time. The other thing that they are opposed to in the organization is higher education. So even if, all of your family and all of your friends are Jehovah's Witnesses, you have passions, you have desires, and a lot of those things, unless they fall in line with what is acceptable in the organization, you just don't do it. You don't have the time to do it. And if you pursue those things, the rest of the congregation really looks down on you. So it's very disincentivized to follow your own desires. Now, I did have that experience as well. But like I said, thankfully, I have found higher education since leaving the organization, and I'll get more into that later. I will say that, for the most part, I had a lot of good friends as a Jehovah's Witness. People that I spent time with, that I felt close to. And I miss some of those friendships. And I am currently not close to nearly any of them. There are some individuals that I knew as a Jehovah's Witness that have also left the organization. But there were many people that I was close to that they're still Jehovah's Witnesses. And I just don't have any contact with them anymore. I've heard other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses kind of be upset with these individuals, and I understand that. It really hurts when you feel like you're close to someone and you truly believe that they love you and appreciate you for who you are. But then when you leave the organization, you just lose all that. Like, all those years that you had with these people, they're just gone. They're just gone. So, to be quite honest, I didn't do a lot of dating as a Jehovah's Witness. And it wasn't because there weren't girls that I was interested in. There was this girl that I dated in high school. And I would say I was in love with her. But this gets back to the issue with higher education. I don't remember the conversation specifically, but I know we were at a fair or something. We were walking and holding hands and, whatever young people do. And we had a talk about our future and, her goals were part of, expanding her ministry in the organization. She wanted to do more as the Jehovah's Witness. And I respected that at the time. But I wanted to go to college, to university. And I didn't want to get married until I had finished my schooling. I didn't think it would be fair to her. I didn't think it would be fair to me either. I wanted to be able to focus on that, have a good job in the future so I could take care of us. Maybe we could have some children together. And I guess that 4 years was just too long for her. So she ended up being with someone else. And I was heartbroken for a long time. Even now. It's hard to talk about because I really did love her. But looking at it now, having woken up from the organization, if I were married to her, things would be very difficult. I have spoken to her in recent years, and at least the way she presents herself to me, she's very strong in her faith, and that's, I don't want to take that away from her. It's just, if we had ended up together, I think our life would be extremely difficult. And I mean, I can't judge her. I don't know, because we never had that opportunity, but I don't think that it would have worked out. And I don't know what's worse. I really don't. Because I've seen other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and sometimes their partners wake up and sometimes they don't. And especially me being non-binary, I don't know if that's something that she would be accepting of. I understand that it's difficult with the indoctrination that the Jehovah's Witnesses receive. It's really hard to accept certain things that you've been told have been sinful and satanic your entire life. So, I don't know if it would have worked out. But even now, at times, I do miss spending time with her. And I really wish that we could have a friendship, but the way things are, I don't see that happening. As far as dating after the organization, there's been some. I'm kind of focusing on my education at this point. But I've met a lot of interesting people in my group that are part of, the field that I'm going into. And so I feel really hopeful about the future. I believe that at some point, I will find someone that appreciates me for who I am, and I will do the same with them. So, I had my first doubts as a teenager. I remember I was at a hair salon, and I was getting my hair cut, and the individual was obviously a gay man. And it sounds so horrible to say it now, but I felt really bad for him because he was gay. And, at the time, I thought that God would destroy individuals who were gay, homosexual. I didn't know too much about the LGBT community at the time, but obviously I knew that gay people existed. And I remember having a conversation with one of my parents about it. And then I thought about it later. And it just didn't make any sense. I have never believed that being gay or part of the LGBT community, as far as identifying with those attributes, is a choice. This is something that a person is born with. And I felt that even at the time when I was a teenager. And I just couldn't justify in my mind that a loving God would punish someone for just being who they were, something they had no control over. I just couldn't accept that. Another doubt that I had as a teenager had to do with the resurrection. So, Jehovah's Witnesses believe that there will be a time period after God's final war, which they call Armageddon, where everyone who was alive on earth prior to that would be resurrected. In other words, if they'd been dead a long time, they would get essentially a brand new body and live in a paradise for 1,000 years. And people who had died closer to Armageddon, I guess assuming that their body hadn't decomposed yet, those individuals would be resurrected in their current body. But what I couldn't wrap my head around was those individuals that had died thousands of years ago. What didn't make sense to me was that these individuals that had been resurrected, how could they be the exact individuals that had previously died? Because who we are, from what we understand, is in our brain and in our bodies. There's a connection, but your consciousness, essentially, as far as we know, comes from your brain. And so when that's destroyed, you're gone. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses do believe that individuals will be stored in what they call Jehovah's memory. But what didn't make sense is that even if Jehovah had copied someone's memories into essentially a new brain, how could that be that person? Sure, it would be a copy of that person. I could see that, but I couldn't see it being the actual person. And I remember when I was auxiliary pioneering, I had a conversation with one of my friends at the time, and basically there was no answer. It was just, just trust Jehovah. And I couldn't buy it. It didn't make sense to me. I started questioning my gender, I would say probably in my late teens and early 20s. I remember there was a YouTube channel with a trans woman, and for the life of me, I cannot remember who she is. I've tried to find her channel, but I don't remember who she is. But the point of the story, I remember watching her channel religiously. She was vlogging at the time, and just her experience fascinated me. Because up to this point, I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses sometimes use the expression of like being born in the wrong body when they're referring to trans people, and that's not inherent to Jehovah's Witnesses. I know that other individuals do that as well, but I had never had any experience with any trans or non-binary individuals that I was aware of, at least during my time as a Jehovah's Witness. Because I knew that I was different. And there wasn't anyone that I knew that I could have that conversation with, because none of my friends, none of my family, none of them understood any of that, had no concept beyond being born in the wrong body. And so I remember watching her vlogs and kind of in a small way relating to her experience. At this point, I don't know what it feels like to be a man or a woman. I don't know what that feels like. All I know that sometimes it feels right to present and act masculine, and then sometimes it feels right to present and act feminine. And I'm not going to worry about that. I'm just going to the best of my ability, just be who I am. So like I've mentioned, there are a lot of issues with the Jehovah's Witness organization. And as I mentioned before, I had some doubts as a child, as a teenager growing up. But the straw that broke the camel's back was the UN scandal. As a Jehovah's Witness, I had a strong aversion, hatred of hypocrisy. And I would say that in general, Jehovah's Witnesses, at least they claim to be against hypocrisy because they don't see it in the organization themselves. And I would include myself in that group where I wasn't aware of hypocrisy. For the most part, I wasn't aware of hypocrisy in the organization, but I certainly hated it. There was a book released by the organization called Revelation, Its Grand Climax at Hand. And I remember really loving that book. Probably mainly for the pictures, because in general the book is nonsense, but I would say that I enjoyed reading it, studying it, in the organization. Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses have a belief, and it's mentioned in this book, that the UN is the wild beast mentioned in Revelation. Now, you would think that if an organization really believed that the UN was the prophesied wild beast of Revelation, that they would have nothing to do with that organization. Well, as it turns out, I think it was during the 90s, I'll link to the information if I can find it, but the Watchtower organization, now jw.org, was a non-governmental organization associated with the UN. And they had their reasons, probably financial. I don't really care. What I do care, when I found out about this, how could an organization who claims that the UN is the wild beast of Revelation, needs to be avoided, is an associate member with them for nearly a decade, And when I learned that, I thought to myself, how would Jehovah allow his organization to be associated with the wild beast for 10 years? And that's when it clicked. It just couldn't be God's organization. Jehovah would never have allowed that to happen. And so at that moment I knew that I too was in a false religion. Now I will mention, and this is quite embarrassing for me, there are other way more important reasons to not be associated with Jehovah's Witnesses. And I would say that the top three, and these are fairly accepted by the rest of the community, are the no blood teaching, where they refuse blood even for medical reasons, the covering up of child abuse due to the 2 Witness Rule, and then also the shunning, disfellowshipping that happens in the organization. And I wish I had been a good enough person to have left for one of those reasons. But I left because I couldn't stand hypocrisy. Now, I have talked to my therapist about this, and I know it doesn't make me a bad person, but it taught me something about myself. That I was morally blind. I wish that my moral fortitude had motivated me to leave for one of those reasons. Leaving the Jehovah's Witness organization was probably the most difficult thing I have ever done. I spent many years in a state of depression, questioning who I was, what I believed, what I thought I knew. And granted, a lot of that was important to becoming the person that I am now, but it was a very difficult process. And it's not something that I would wish on another individual lightly. I mean, granted, I wish that more Jehovah's Witnesses would wake up and realize that they're part of a false religion just as they're opposed to other false religions, but the process itself is extremely difficult. And I know that there are people out there that don't survive the process. I had a friend who was a Jehovah's Witness who completed suicide many years ago. And it was very heartbreaking. I didn't know at the time why they did it. I've since learned some information. But a lot of it had to do with the way they were treated in the organization. Personally, as I mentioned previously, I've lost contact with a lot of people that were close friends of mine. I miss their friendships. And I understand they're indoctrinated, and it would be very difficult to have a relationship now. But I can't help it. I miss these people. A lot of Jehovah's Witnesses are good people. A lot of them. They're just wrong. They're just in an organization that takes advantage of them. And so, if any of my friends were to wake up, I would love to rekindle those friendships. Because when I was in, they meant a lot to me. I've also lost contact with some of my family who are Jehovah's Witnesses. I still struggle to rekindle the relationship with the part of my family that were never Jehovah's Witnesses, but the ones who were, I still talk to some of them. A lot of them know that I'm faded, but they don't really understand what my beliefs are. And I try and keep those conversations to a minimum because I do value the family that I have left. And I don't want to lose them. I mentioned time earlier, and all we really have is time. And so even though I don't agree with my family on many things, I still want to make the most of the time that we have left together. So, as I mentioned earlier, I'm currently in a graduate program. Maybe I didn't mention it, but I am. I'm in a graduate program. I'm studying to be a therapist, a mental health provider. And I would say, for the first time in my life, I feel hopeful, truly hopeful and excited about the future. I have a deep desire to help people who have gone through similar experiences to my own, as far as, being in a high control organization. And I know that is something that people are more aware of now, and that's great. I think shining a light on high control, high demand organizations is essential. And it's part of the reason why I'm making this video, to be honest, but I really have a desire to help people who have gone through experiences similar to my own. I want to hear their stories, what they've been through, the strengths they have, and where they choose to take their future now that they have way more control over it. And I want to help them on that journey as best I can. So as I'm sure you've noticed, this is the first video on this channel. And as far as the future of my channel, I honestly don't know. I'd love to have conversations with other ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, other ex-High Control Group members. I'd also like to shine a light on maybe some of the issues that I see as in the organization now, having a little bit more education in psychology. The Jehovah's Witness organization is very harmful from various standpoints. And I feel that in some small way, adding my voice to that, I might be able to share some of the things that I've learned, and I can share those with people. Something that a lot of individuals don't realize is that the feelings that they get make perfect sense due to what has happened to them. And so maybe I'm able to help normalize some of the experiences, some of the thoughts, some of the feelings of people like myself who have left the organization. But I suppose we'll see.